Host of the WGN Political Report, Paul Lisnek, is here to discuss more on George Ryan as well as other political headlines. But let's talk about your personal relationship that you had with George Ryan. Now, you had some experiences.
I did. Interviewed him a few times, saw him in some non-political environments. And the thing is, he would always come across, of course, very gruff. That was sort of his image. He really wasn't like that. I mean, it was in his persona.
We had to be.
But there was also sort of another side to him. I think history will look on him as a much more complex figure. The people who have the memories of him either remember, well, that's the governor one of the governors that went to prison for doing something. But of course, he'll forever be remembered for the moratorium where he took people on death penalty, which was totally against the general Republican view at the time he did that. When I talked to him about that, he goes, look, it wasn't about Republican or Democrat. It's what I knew to be right. And he had wrestled at night with whether or not he was going to let somebody die, here in Illinois. And then he decided that just can't be anymore. He was against the Equal Rights Amendment and fought vehemently, where he talked about having, sort of red paint, blood-looking things painted on his doors and stuff because people were so angry. But he actually fought for assault weapons bans, which would not be the Republican thing to do. So to try and peg him in one way or another, I think, is probably unfair. I think history will go down and see him as a complex character. I think it's only fair now that he's passed to sort of look at and realize it wasn't as simple as time in prison or the moratorium itself. He did a lot of interesting things.
He had a lot of positions and had a lot of experience, and you said in many ways was a likable guy.
Yeah, well, first of all, he started off as a pharmacist, right? I mean, that's where he didn't come out of politics. He wasn't born into that. That was his life and until he got into public thing. Now, I will say that once in politics, he understood how it worked. And he could be very tough in terms of how he interacted with people, and he fought, suffered for no fools. I thought an interesting moment of I sort of reminding myself of when his wife was passing, and he secretly was taken out of prison to go to her bedside.
For a couple hours.
Just for a couple of hours. He was not allowed to go to her funeral, and of course there was a lot of hubbub about that. When he's in prison, you need to pay the price, and I understand that. But at the same time, isn't it sort of nice when a little humanity for somebody who's done a non-violent crime, where they're facing something like that. His wife of over 40 years at that time, high school sweethearts, a couple of moments to say goodbye. Call me a softie. I didn't have a problem with that.
All right, let's move on and talk a little bit about Washington politics, because every day it's something new. Waltz Hegseth up again with the app now that Waltz is going to be nominated for the ambassador to the UN.
It's really interesting, right? Because Waltz, who gets taken out of his national security advisor position and is given the UN position. So I think there's a couple of things going on. First of all, President Trump didn't announce that before the 100-day mark. I don't think he wanted to give Democrats even the appearance of any kind of win. So he does that afterwards, but also so that it didn't look like any kind of a defeat here. He gives them the UN. The question I raise on that is, if, and it appears, the reason he was removed from his job was because of the Signal app and sharing what would otherwise be protected information, don't you have that same information, very similar kinds of information, in the UN position? So why are you putting him back into a position where he's got that kind of responsibility and important information to share? Well, he's learned his lessons. Well, as you know, in a recent cabinet meeting of just the other day, one of the reporters caught him on his Signal app, sending people. I don't know what lessons he's learned, but it's sort of interesting. Marco Rubio, of course, comes in to cover that position. Rubio, remember,
he's got like 4 roles now.
He's the national archivist. He's doing all this stuff. The last person to actually hold a couple of the roles that he had was Henry Kissinger during Nixon's days. But for Rubio, he's really gotten into Trump's circle of trust. Not anywhere you would have put him back in 2015, when they were running for it, and they were sort of bitter enemies.
Hegseth, though, stays in that circle of trust.
Well, he does, because Trump stands behind him and likes him. The truth is, if somebody was going to go because of that problem, yes, it was Waltz who brought in the journalist into the conversation. But Hegseth, there's been reports since he's had other Signal conversations with that kind of sensitive information. He had staff asking for these things to be installed on his computer. He still apparently has a lot to learn, but Trump stands behind him, and as long as he does, no one's going to say a peep.
Would you say that tariffs are the big headline still after several weeks in the White House right now?
Well, on the economic issue, sure, because it's in the issue. It's in the news every day. Here's the thing. The tariffs haven't really kicked in. The stores like Walmart or Target, they have the resources, Micah, to buy ahead. So they bought goods to fill their
Stocked
shelves,
up, yeah.
stocked up for the next period of weeks. So it's going to be a month or 6 weeks before it's actually felt in those kinds of stores. Where you're seeing it now are the small stores, the small business person who says, I don't have,
shops.
yeah, they don't have the money to buy ahead and to stock up on the shelves. So it's going to be felt sooner in those kind of environments. Later in the other ones, there was some good economic news today, but the economic news, of course, is always looking backwards, not forwards. So there's some economists who basically say, look, we appear to be headed for trouble. Supporters of the president stand behind him. They're going to go into this economic situation, whatever it may bring, and they'll deal with it. And other people, of course, will have issues. We'll see how it unfolds. But I think we're going to watch it unfold in the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Paul, Donald Trump has long had it in for NPR, for PBS, because he calls their coverage bias here. So he's cutting their federal funding, which is pretty significant. Where do you think this battle is going to end up?
Well, it's significant because he didn't have the power to do it. He doesn't have the power to do a lot of things he's doing, but specifically on that, this whole PBS law thing was passed in the 1960s. It was specifically written, go back and check it out, it was specifically written to keep any president or Congress from defunding them. It was meant to be independent. So truthfully, he does not have the authority to defund them as he's trying to do. 2 points on that. Number one, he ain't the first Republican president to try and do it. Go back to Bush and others. Many Republican presidents have tried to defund PBS, NPR. There's a great clip that you'll see on the airs now of Mr. Rogers testifying before the Senate, and he talks about the good he does for kids. And at one point, the senator who responds says, you know what? You got your $20 million, when he just listened to what it is he did. But here's the thing about all these cuts he's doing. There are a lot of areas he's cutting funds that he doesn't have the authority to cut. However, because these things, like Voice of America, because the staff is getting gutted, or USAID, all this stuff is getting gutted, it doesn't matter that after a court challenge, that NPR or PBS, they will win down the line. By that point, it's already too late. He's accomplished what he wanted. And that's what I think his advisors from Project 2025 have sort of told him. Let him fight you. Let him take you to court. It'll be dead by the time they ever get a court verdict.
In his first term, the president wanted a big military parade.
Yeah.
Now he wants it again. They shut him down the first time.
He never got it the first time, right.
Shut him down the first time. Now he wants it again on his birthday. What do you think about that?
Well, of course, is it his birthday, or is it because it's also the birthday of the military? Both of those things are good. It is 250th birthday, right? Not of the military, of the Army.
Yeah.
And on June 14th, look, as you said, he wanted this years ago, and essentially the mayor of D.C. shut it down by saying, we can't have tanks on the street, it'll destroy the streets. The cost is estimated to be well in excess of $10 million. Once again, I know our viewers who are Trump supporters say, give his parade, I will enjoy as the military marches in front of him. I think the other side of that coin is it looks awful authoritarian when a leader stands there and has the military parading. Secondly, $10 million, when a lot of people are losing their jobs and we're doging everybody out and cutting funds, is that the right view you want for the $10 million to be spent? With acknowledgement that Trump supporters say absolutely worth every penny. I would question whether or not that's where money should go.
Amazon back down.
Well, can we do? I'm sorry, but just before, because I think it's related to this, if you don't mind.
Sure.
It's the issue of him in Veterans Day, and maybe this was, but I felt like this comes up now, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Which is he wants to rename Veterans Day. He's announced that today, and he wants Veterans Day to become a national day of celebration for World War I, and that's in November. And then in May, he wants to have a national day of celebration for World War II. Okay. And he says, because we won, and why does nobody celebrate these things? My take on that is, well, look, my dad fought in World War II. Happy to honor World War II. But I always honored my dad, may he rest in peace, on Veterans Day. My question is, and they're all gone, right? World War II, a few left. World War I, nobody around. But if you fought in Vietnam, if you fought in the Korean War, if you fought in Iraq, if you fought in Afghanistan, where is your day of honor and respect?
This is inclusive.
I mean,
so what is the rationale?
Well, he said it. His rationale is he thinks World War I and World War II were victories, and those need to be celebrated. Now, unless he's going to give us a day for every war or relocate Veterans Day somewhere else, which he can't do, but on the calendar to honor everybody else, I just feel as though somebody at some point is going to say, Mr. President, you have a lot of living veterans. And by the way, people who serve now when they're in the war. Veterans Day is for all of them, to honor them. So right now it looks like a questionable idea. We'll see it. I think it'll get massaged over time.
Mayor Brandon Johnson got a lot of flack for not being in Springfield a lot. Well, he went to Springfield. How did he do?
Well, the real news is that he even had to go. He should have been doing this months ago. We heard Governor Pritzker sort of make the point, sort of saying, where's he been, right? We have not talked a lot to him. So Springfield does not seem to be open to wanting to give him what he's looking for. Obviously, Chicago is very important. They're going to have to do something to come through. But I don't know that that as budget talks have proceeded where they are, that Johnson's going to get what he wants. And it means a lot more difficulty here for the city. And Ray, I didn't mean to step. You mentioned Amazon.
I mean,
before.
that was an interesting. Also, Trump's budget framework, but the point about Bezos was,
Bezos just look, he backed down. I mean, the way it got played after. The bottom line is that Amazon was going to say, here's how much of what's going on as a result of the tariff, and then he got a phone call from the president. Pretty clear he backed off, and all of a sudden he started to say, well, we were thinking about it, we weren't going to do it, we're not doing it. I think a lot of people, whether you support the president or not, would say, I wouldn't mind knowing exactly how much of this money is now as a result of the tariff. But I don't think the president wants people to see that number. I think because he's told us, remember, China's paying for everything. That would be a way of saying, actually, China's not paying for it, which they're not. So this Sunday, we're going to have Mike Frericks, our treasurer, will be in. But coming in on an interesting topic. He and his wife have gone through IVF to have children, and he actually asked to come on to talk about that procedure because a lot of people have questions about it. And so he's going to talk about that. And of course, I got to ask him if he's going to run for Senate because everybody's talking about that as well, along with other things tied to how he's dealing with the Trump administration's policies. And then also joining us, Richard Gordon, a political strategist, to talk about Trump's first 100 days and what Trump has successfully accomplished and what he hasn't.
All right, Paul, thanks.
Thank you, guys. Good weekend.
You too.